The following is a project of our nonprofit newsroom. Support Midcoast Morning and local community-centered journalism today by signing up to be a monthly sustaining donor at chly.ca/donate. It doesn't take much money to support local news.
Hello and welcome to Midcoast Morning. I'm Joe Pugh. It's May, and that means new rules for short-term rentals are in effect. As of this month, in communities with a population over 10,000, short-term rentals will only be allowed in a host's principal residence or in a secondary suite or accessory dwelling on the same property. A number of less populated communities, including Gabriola Island and Tofino, have opted in to the regulations. In those areas, the rules will take effect on November 1st. According to data obtained from the website AirDNA earlier this week, there were 999 short-term rental listings in Nanaimo. The city requires short-term rental operators to have a license, which costs $165 for the year. A March staff report found that there were fewer than 300 licenses for short-term rentals in the city. For more on the impact of the provincial rules coming into force, I spoke with Nanaimo Mayor Leonard Krogh. Has the city seen any evidence of a change leading up to this?
I can't say we've seen evidence of a change per se, but certainly the imposition of it on a province-wide basis followed what a lot of municipalities were already doing in terms of regulating short-term rentals. And it's a reaction, I think, in the broadest sense, to the impact that they were having on certain neighborhoods. I mean, many folks, I hate to say this, were just buying a big house, renting it out willy-nilly, not, how shall I say, monitoring or managing the facility in an appropriate way. So you'd have literally party houses or piles and piles of vehicles parked in cul-de-sacs or whatever the case may be. So there was quite a community reaction. And I think it's fair to say that the hotel-motel industry as well saw it as a sort of unfair competition in some respects because they have to meet so many regulations and collect taxes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
In a March city staff report, it came out that there were 291 business licenses given to short-term rentals, but close to 1,000 listings for short-term rentals within the boundaries of Nanaimo. What's maybe the reconciliation between those two numbers and the big gap between them?
I think it tells you that it required regulation, that a lot of people were making money and impacting their neighborhoods, but again, in competition to an established industry that has to meet regulatory requirements. It's kind of like me setting up a small restaurant in the back kitchen of our house when restaurateurs have to meet food and safety regulations and all pay taxes, et cetera, have a proper business license, and I'm just sliding under the radar. The numbers speak for themselves. This will help regulate it, but it also points out that there was an incredibly significant demand for this. I had occasion on the weekend to visit a short-term rental, a lovely little house on a large property in the North End, related to a matter I'm involved in, visiting some folks who had come out from Calgary. And it was a lovely location and wouldn't be disturbing to the neighborhood. It was a large property. But, you know, we also had reports, as I say, of large houses in lovely neighborhoods where it was just an unmonitored nightmare. The point of ensuring that it's part of your property and you live there is that you will control and ensure that the behaviors of the people who come in will be properly monitored, won't be a disturbance to the neighborhood, illegal activities or whatever won't be taking place, and there will be a certain amount of revenue flowing to government as a result as well. I mean, let's face it, if everybody paid their taxes, legitimate taxes, it would be easier for government not to have to raise the taxes for the rest of us.
And I understand part of the rationale of these changes as well is with the intention of making more spaces available for people to live in on a long-term basis and kind of increase the vacancy rate.
Precisely. I mean, look, we have a ridiculously low vacancy rate, and we have had for years. If you're living in existing accommodation, that a private dwelling, a basement suite, for instance, and the dwelling is sold and you're punted out because the new owners are taking over the whole house, you could be going from $800 or $900 a month for one bedroom to $1,600 or $1,800 a month for a one bedroom accommodation. And the reality is, particularly for seniors on fixed incomes, that means essentially you will be rendered homeless. And there is no question there is a portion of the homeless, unhoused population in Nanaimo that are simply poor. It is not some stereotype that it's related to mental health or addictions or bad behavior or criminality or all of the things that people ascribe to folks in the street, which isn't necessarily fair many times. It's just pure old-fashioned poverty. You don't have enough income to find accommodation in the marketplace.
So if we know that there are close to 600 of these listings for short-term rentals that are presumably operating without a business license, what's the process for bringing them into compliance with that?
Well, the provinces now, because it's province-wide, is going to step in and allow for proper enforcement. We work on a complaint-driven process in municipal government. That's just the standard. If you're doing something that may breach a bylaw on your property, if your neighbors don't complain and they're okay with it, we're not going to be sending people around to investigate. That's just the reality of how the system works. And frankly, if neighbors are happy with it, is it really important that, quote unquote, the city interfere? In a case like this, it will, as you pointed out, put housing back into the market for people who really need it. It's not, for vacationers who can afford to come, or in fairness, perhaps sometimes temporary workers coming to town for short periods. And it will allow for proper management. And also it may lead to, public policy that enhances the growth of short-term rentals, and at the same time enhances the development and growth of rental accommodation generally. We'll see how it plays out. I think it's good that the province is stepping in, though, and allowing for enforcement, because candidly, regardless of the way business is done, if we want to have a fair system, you have to have rules, and you have to have rules that are enforced against everyone. When people take advantage, don't play by the rules, it means, quote unquote, the honest folks are being dealt with unfairly.
I'm just kind of struck by the idea of a complaints-driven process where it almost feels like to force, the majority of people doing this to get a business license, you would need their neighbors to sort of snitch on them. In a process as well where it's a matter of, there's no secret here. These things are listed with their address online, and anyone could find them in 2 minutes. I don't know. Is there anything you can say to that? Just kind of absurdity, it seems to me.
Well, I think, how shall I say, what municipalities have done versus what the province is planning to do. This will lead to, I think, more credible and appropriate enforcement over time. And we'll see how it plays out. I mean, this is if you will, a very new step for the province of British Columbia. But I think it's the right thing to do. And as much as I appreciate some folks say, why are you interfering with my quote unquote right just to rent a cabin or a basement suite or a bedroom or whatever? Why is that of interest to the state? Well, it's because it does have an impact on your city and on your neighbors. And it also provides an opportunity with these listings and requiring business licenses to ensure that income that's derived from this, people pay their income tax on it. Most folks have no opportunity to avoid, let alone evade paying income tax because they're workers and the T4 goes to Revenue Canada and Revenue Canada knows what you earned and that's the end of the story and you pay X amount of tax. So be it. People who have perhaps been not declaring all of their income will now be much more likely to face enforcement and ensure that income tax is indeed paid. And that's a good thing.
Nanaimo Mayor Leonard Krogh speaking about provincial rules for short-term rentals that have come into effect this month.
Midcoast Morning is made possible by the Community Radio Fund of Canada's Radio Meters program and listeners like you. Support Midcoast Morning and CHLY's nonprofit newsroom today by becoming a sustaining donor at chly.ca/donate. Local news can't survive without your support. Another way to help us out is to share this show with your friends and tell them why they should support us. Finally, if you're listening to the podcast edition of Midcoast Morning, go and give us a positive review on Apple Podcasts or whatever podcast feed you use. It helps people find us.
We're talking short-term rental rules on today's program. As of May 1st, in communities with more than 10,000 people, short-term rentals are only allowed in an owner's principal residence or a secondary suite or accessory dwelling on the same property. When the rules were first announced, there were concerns about their potential to impact Resort Drive in Parksville. But those have since been addressed, according to Blaine Sipos, Executive Director of the Parksville Qualicum Beach Tourism Association. I spoke with him to get some perspective on the new rules.
Parksville is pretty unique in that it has like an entire district that's dedicated to tourism commercial accommodations, which is Resort Drive. That's along Rathtrevor Beach, and I think it's pretty common. Like there's hotels kind of stripped in other communities, but it's not like a whole district like what Parksville had dedicated many years ago as part of their official community plan.
And I understand you had some concerns around what would happen specifically with that tourism-zoned area at Resort Drive. Can you tell me about what those were and what the situation is now with them?
Yeah, we knew the province introduced these short-term vacation rentals last fall to address like those residential homes that were being lost to Airbnbs. Like I think that everybody agreed that was a good move for the province to introduce these regulations. But unfortunately, the initial drafts of the regulations unintentionally created this situation where strata resorts, like those in Parksville along Resort Drive, were going to be impacted. And it's like strata resorts basically run like any other hotel. The main difference is that each unit is owned by an individual rather than like the whole property being owned by like a company or something like that. And these strata resort owners, they buy their units for various reasons. Like some might buy it for property investment, some might use them for their own family vacations, and some of them use them as like sort of an ongoing rental income, whether it's through the resort management company or on their own. And these strata resorts make up about 50% of the hotel rooms in Parksville, Qualicum Beach. So losing these properties to long-term residential accommodation, although we know that there's a need for residential accommodation, losing 50% of our hotel rooms would have been disastrous to our economy. So thankfully, the government heard these concerns, like the Tourism Association ourselves, the City of Parksville, the Resort Owners, Tourism Industry Association of BC, our MLA, the Hotel Association. We all had sort of a common message to the government that like these businesses, these strata resorts are legitimate, like purpose-built accommodations and shouldn't be part of these regulations. So thankfully the government heard these concerns and amended the regulations just ahead of the May 1st deadline, probably about a month ago, I think is when they made these changes. I guess the only thing that remains to be seen in regards to these regulations is that part of the province's approach was to create a registry of short-term vacation rentals that were legitimate either through like business licensing or through zoning or something like that. And it's still really unclear how the province is going to go about that aspect of their compliance and enforcement efforts. But thankfully, for the most part, our concerns around the short-term vacation rentals regulations are behind us. And we're just in time for the peak tourism season.
So now that those concerns have been addressed, how do you, specifically as a member of the tourism sector, look at these overall changes and rules around short-term rentals?
I think it's too soon to say how the regulations are going to impact Parksville, Colquhoun Beach, or any other community in the province. What I can say is that our region had about 1,000 entire place short-term vacation rentals in 2023. And from what we understand through the data that we receive, many of these will not be allowed to operate after May 1st. On the other hand, our region's hotels are rarely ever 100% occupied, even in peak season. And we don't have the hotel room shortage like Vancouver does. You may have seen in the media how they're short like 10,000 hotel rooms or something in Vancouver. So we don't have that challenge. So we believe that there's enough hotel capacity in our region to absorb the loss of short-term vacation rentals, especially in those off-peak seasons. On the other hand, we anticipate that these that long-term residential accommodation will become more available and affordable. Even just a portion of these 1,000 entire place short-term vacation rentals get put back into the residential rental inventory. So it's probably not going to happen overnight, but hopefully it'll be one of those puzzle pieces that's going to address the affordability challenge and also the chronic staff shortage that our region has suffered for, well, almost as long as I can remember.
And what are you going to be watching for months, maybe a year down the road, to see whether you feel these changes have made a positive impact in the community?
Well, I have to say the first thing is really to see what the province does around creating this registry that the platforms will use to populate like the accommodation listings for BC. Like in our region, largely short-term vacation rentals have been operating illegally without licenses or in zones that don't allow for them. So, like generally, short-term vacation rental people aren't necessarily the biggest rule followers in the region. I don't want to paint the whole industry that way, but when we have 1,000 short-term vacation rentals that were operating in PQB in 2023, and like they're like maybe just a couple dozen licensed in the city of Parksville, that is pretty obvious of what was going on. So we're hoping that this registry will be really well thought out, and from there we'll be able to start tracking basically how many of these short-term vacation rentals are still on the market, and then through various means, whether it's through government statistics or whatever, they're able to determine what the rental vacancy rate is for residential long-term in our region. And so I guess hopefully watching that number grow to a point where I think the province is hoping that each community has meets a target of about 3% of a rental vacancy rate in each community. So I guess both of those factors put together. But again, I'm not really anticipating that we're going to see this in months. It's probably going to be more over the span of a year or two, or maybe even more. So
the new rules that you can only have a short-term rental in your primary residence if you live in a community over 10,000 people that doesn't have an exemption, those are coming into force May 1st. But as of the time we're speaking, it's not exactly clear how that will be enforced from the province. So you feel we just need to see how the rules will actually be enforced before we're going to know how well they're going to work? Exactly. Because in most jurisdictions, like the city or the town or the regional district area that we serve, bylaw enforcement is done on a complaint-driven basis. So basically, if somebody's operating short-term vacation rental in a neighborhood that isn't licensed, there's really no way for as it stands now for these local governments to know what's happening, and so they don't proactively enforce that. So by building out this registry,
we're hoping that they're going to work really closely with local governments to make sure that those who are licensed and zoned properly, it gets reflected on the platforms in a timely manner. But yeah, it's still really unclear as to how that's going to come about.
Anything else you think it's important to bring to this conversation today?
I think it's important to note that the province, these regulations that they've introduced, they're being considered as like the floor. So they're not going to stop local governments from putting on additional regulation onto short-term vacation rentals, and it's really given communities the opportunity to sort of craft a short-term vacation rental strategy that works for them. What works for Tofino might not work for Qualicum Beach, and what works for Qualicum Beach might not work for Parksville. And so it's unlikely that we're going to see like a standard across the province, but at least now that the province has built this regulation as the floor, we know that the intention is to really preserve those residential homes for people who need them.
Blaine Sipos, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me on this.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure.
Blaine Sipos is the executive director of the Parksville Qualicum Beach Tourism Association. I also spoke with the Provincial Minister of Housing, Ravi Kahlon, to ask how the new rules will be enforced. How will the principal residency requirement for short-term rentals that's coming into effect May 1st, how will it be enforced?
So as of May 1st, local governments will have the ability through a new data portal to upload any property that they believe that is not following the rules, whether that's principal residence requirement or local government rules. Within seconds, that will go directly to platforms who have 5 days to review and remove any listing that does not comply with the new rules. If they choose not to comply, platforms can be facing fines, significant fines. And if a host continuously tries to skirt the rules, they will face significant fines as well. This was something UBCM and mayors across the province asked us to step into to ensure that they could enforce the rules, and then there was real teeth to ensuring that the housing that we need is available for people in our communities, not just for investors buying these homes for rentals.
Now, you've said there that local governments will have the ability to raise the issue of properties they think aren't complying with the rules. Speaking locally in Nanaimo, a recent staff report suggested that less than 300 of almost 1,000 short-term rentals in the community had the business license that was required. But everyone I've spoken to has indicated that it's kind of a complaints-driven process. Someone needs to raise this as an issue before there's going to be any action taken. So how will that change with these new rules?
Well, by the middle of the month, the platforms are required to give us an entire list of every single property that is listed as a short-term rental in British Columbia. So the first phase is to have a local government raise with us the properties that they have identified. In the middle of the month, we'll get a complete list of properties, and we'll be able to do some checks within the province. And lastly, all the data will be shared with the Ministry of Finance, who has data right now on who has principal residential and who has investment properties, so that the two are being connected.
So there will be folks on the province's end who are actively monitoring and taking action on this, and it will switch from a complaint-driven process.
Well, we have 4 people hired right now. We have funding for up to 15 people, and we have digital tools created for us to scrape information off of platform sites, and of course, at the same time, get information from our partners. Between the two, we do believe we're going to be able to ensure that all these hosts are following the rules, and the platforms are respecting local government rules as well. By the end of the year, we will have a provincial-wide registry, which will require every single host to share information about their property, sign waivers, and that will be able to take the enforcement to another step. But we believe the measures we have in the interim will do the trick for us as well.
In the medium term, how will the government measure the effectiveness of these new rules as far as creating more long-term housing stock?
Well, we know that we're already seeing the impacts of it. We're seeing more rental properties becoming available in communities across the province. We've seen a significant increase in Victoria, in Kelowna, and in Vancouver. Of course, one policy won't solve the entire housing crisis, but we do believe by ensuring that some of these school homes that are being shifted or diverted away towards short-term rental coming back to the market will make an impact. I just met with a woman a few weeks ago who now has a home for her family, also is running a daycare out of it, and it was a short-term rental. And we're hearing these stories in communities throughout the province.
Mr. Kahlon, I'll leave it there. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me, Joe. Be safe.
Ravi Kahlon is British Columbia's Minister of Housing. That's our show for the day. Thank you for joining me. I'm Joe Pugh, host and producer of Midcoast Morning. Jesse Woodward is our executive producer, and Arby Frew is our technical advisor. You can sign up for CHLY's newsletter at chly.ca/subscribe for updates from our nonprofit newsroom and more. Our theme song is First One by local Nanaimo band Waste Management. If you have a story you'd like us to cover, email us at news@chly.ca. That's all for now. I'll talk to you on another Midcoast Morning.
Midcoast Morning would not be possible without the funding of the Community Radio Fund of Canada's Radio Meters program and listeners like you. Midcoast Morning is a project of CHLY's nonprofit newsroom. Support nonprofit journalism in Nanaimo and on the Salish Sea today by becoming a monthly sustaining donor at $5 or more per month. Support the program at chly.ca/donate. If you're already a supporter, record a voice memo telling others where you're listening from and why they too should support our work. After you're done, you can email it to us. Also, share the podcast with your friends. While Meta is blocking Canadian users from sharing news content on their Facebook feeds, you can still share our podcast directly with your friends via Facebook or Instagram Messenger. Finally, this program acknowledges and gives thanks to the Snuneymuxw First Nation as we broadcast and podcast from their traditional territory. Thanks for listening.